All right. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Maybe turn my microphone down a bit. Just a bit more. Okay, I think that sounds a bit better. All right. All right. Uh, Hi. My name is Master Reese's, and welcome to my presentation. It is my belief that there exists a franchise that has been cast to the sideline for too long. A franchise that is ready to make its comeback. And so I would like to show you my pitch for Brothers in Arms 4: The Last Winter. Name pending. Now, I believe one of two possibilities exists for the sequel. If Brothers in Arms 4 is already far into development by Gearbox, then my hope, or then I hope my pitch is able to provide a bit of an extra push and perhaps give a few interesting ideas to spice up the current project. But if there is no mainline game in development, or it's in an especially early state, my hope is that this pitch will encourage the developers to fully commit to its development, and that the ideas I put forth be seriously considered for it. At the end of the day, I hope the developers see the I hope the developers see that the market is ready for what this franchise has to offer modern audiences. Now, it is important to note that what I'm offering is a framework that can be iterated upon. After all, no AAA game is a solo effort, so the consideration of others should always be taken into account before pushing a project into full development. So, by all means, let's get this video within the reach of Gearbox and Randy Pitchford. And it's like, we're watching a live stream right now, but I plan on adding this to a video I hope to push out on YouTube on my channel in just a few days. So keep an eye out for that. And again, let's try and share that with Gearbox and the folks up by them. Now, this presentation is more so for those familiar with the franchise, so I will not be explaining the intricate details of what these games are, and I will be spoiling some things. But in any case, this intro has gone on long enough, and we have a fair bit of ground to cover. So, let's get started. So, over the course of this presentation, we will cover 4 major sections of drastically varying length. Firstly, what is Brothers in Arms? What makes these games what they are, that unique core that exists in each game? Then we'll explore how the franchise changed through each mainline game. And of course, there is no reason to make a game without first considering if the market is ready for the franchise's return. And finally, the most important section of all, what would my vision of the game look like? Again, this would be more like a framework rather than a fully formed game idea ready to be shipped out. However, it is still by far the lengthiest section. So firstly, what is a Brothers in Arms game at its core? I believe that can be broken into 2 pieces. A story that has developed across all 3 mainline games, and the core game design that supports that story. When considering each entry, the story of Brothers in Arms is about the brotherhood that develops between a group of people in times of war, as well as the weight that comes with leading those people through such times. The games have swapped perspectives between Matthew Baker and his friend Joe Hartsock, but in either case, we see their struggles in leadership, personal responsibility when leading people through the highs and lows of World War II. But to put it in more literal terms, the games are about the exploits of Baker's squad, members of the 101st Airborne. Now, when it comes to the franchise's core design, the first thing that always comes to mind is the 4 Fs. Finding the enemy, fixing them in place with gunfire, flanking their position, and finishing them off from an advantageous spot. Although certain aspects would change from game to game, the 4 Fs were always at the forefront of their design. Supporting this core conceit is the idea that the player will command teams for an on-the-ground tactical action experience. But it is important to note that, similar to other tactical shooters, the player is not an action hero. They are simply the guy in charge and are about as capable and vulnerable as any of their teammates. It is through teamwork that the player will find the most success. Now, we need to cover what each game specifically brought to the table if we are going to fully understand where it needs to go next. So obviously, that begins with the first game, Road to Hill 30, continues into Earned in Blood, and was left on a hiatus after Hell's Highway. The start of the franchise was a strong one that laid a solid groundwork for everything that followed. As someone who recently played through all 3 games, I can confidently say that it has held up remarkably well. You can get them on Steam for fairly cheap as well. Although its presentation has fallen behind compared to what modern shooters are capable of doing, characters and story are still excellent, especially for the time. That being said, it's not a perfect game either. Levels are visually samey, and some of the design choices lack fine-tuning. Namely, the balancing on certain guns and the hyper-lethality of enemy MGM placements. But at the end of the day, it was a solid foundation with plenty of room to grow. With such a short development time, the developers were able to make the most of what came before and craft something that improves on almost every aspect of the previous game. A personal favorite improvement is in the presentation. Cutscenes, in-game monologues, and the frame story with Marshall make for a much more engaging story. Hartsock is also an excellent protagonist in his own right. The issues from the first game have also been mostly polished out, making for a much more balanced experience. That being said, it is fair to say that the game is simply a more polished version of Road to Hill 30. In fact, it was not a large gap between Hill 30 and this game. Now, in terms of major evolution, we would have to wait until the next game. The game that most modern audiences are most likely familiar with is Hell's Highway, which proves to be a distinct entry in the mainline series. Taking a more cinematic approach, the game is very psychological and often gritty and surreal, which is somewhat a deviation from the grounded and realistic approach the previous games took. They're not necessarily a bad one. It is for these reasons that I say the story is the most memorable in the franchise and a real standout compared to other shooters. These are a few choices, however, that there are a few choices, however, that do not hold it back, or do hold it back. Sorry. Similar to older entries, a short campaign makes it difficult to connect with the many side characters that aren't given a spotlight in the story, including many of your fellow squad mates. The game's more modern design also took a swing at empowering the player in the vein of series like Gears of War. Regenerating health and increased accuracy tends to encourage the player to act recklessly with their character and utilize their squad less. There's also the obligatory sniper and tank levels that look to be linear spectacles in the vein of Call of Duty rather than tactical sandbox challenges. We also have the bazooka team that is either the most overpowered team or the most ineffective one, depending on if the man carrying the bazooka is alive or not. Despite all this, I would say that it's tied with Earned in Blood for my personal favorite in the series. Now that we understand what we're coming from, let's look at where we're going, or rather, why the time is right for the franchise to return into the limelight. This can be encapsulated in three ways. Looking at the demand for a new Brothers in Arms game, checking out how tactical shooters have evolved since the core franchise went into hibernation, and understanding the current state of the overall shooter market and where Brothers in Arms fits in it. I like to think that the series never fully went away. The games, especially Hell's Highway, left a great enough impression on people that they have continued to live on in their hearts. It is these enduring fans that have kept the torch alive and are why a return to the series could potentially explode into a true AAA success. You can look to the success of Alan Wake 2 to see how catering to patient fans can spread fervor that new arrivals can latch onto. And what these fans want more than anything else is a true conclusion to the story of Brothers in Arms. Though it should be somewhat beginner-friendly, which we'll discuss later. But this doesn't have to be the end of the franchise. It is my understanding that a TV show is potentially in the works. Well, I think that is a risky move this far removed from the last game. The idea has merits, so long as it releases with a game. But what this new game most offers is the chance to revitalize the IP as a whole. Just because we are ending Baker's story here, doesn't mean we can't take what we learn here and apply it to other stories. This game's success can be a launching point for the franchise, a fresh start. Now, most people would categorize the Brothers in Arms games as tactical shooters, but what that means has changed over the years. You can take a look at the tactical shooters of before and compare to what we have now, the gap is staggering. They have only grown more sophisticated and all encompassing. But most importantly, their popularity has grown considerably. Games like Escape from Tarkov, Ready or Not, Rainbow Six Siege, and Arma are some of the biggest, most consistently played games around today. But they all lack something that Brothers in Arms has. No other tactical shooter is quite like Brothers in Arms. Its unique blend of action and tactics. Its focus on tactically commanding AI teams while maintaining its identity as a shooter. This means that despite the growth of the tactical market, there is still room for Brothers in Arms' unique style as well as its story, which is notably absent from these examples, leaving all of the more room for it to stand out among its peers. But what about the greater shooting market? It is apparent to anyone that Call of Duty and Battlefield are the reigning champions of the shooter genre. But with that status comes stagnation. People buy these games because they are generally safe, and as such, not much changes between each entry. There is a detached resignation in the COD cycle that ensures consistent sales, but it rarely inspires much in the way of real ingenuity and excitement. That is also why the last thing Brothers in Arms needs to do is directly compete with them. The moment people start to seriously compare this game with COD and Battlefield, we will have already lost the marketing war. But that doesn't mean Brothers in Arms doesn't have its own place in the market. While COD, Battlefield, and most other shooters place extreme emphasis on their multiplayer social offerings, Brothers in Arms has the chance to share what it is most good at: its single-player campaign and story. Sony's single-player offerings have shown that the single-player experience can be very lucrative in the current AAA space. And that is what any marketing for this game should focus on. Think less Apex Legends and more Spec Ops: The Line. Do that, and the game will become a real standout in the shooter crowd. 1 second. Now, all the marketing in the world wouldn't fix a lackluster game. So let's focus on what that game could look like. My framework for success starts with ideas that have appeared in the franchise before, either returning wholesale or evolved in some way. More radical ideas that look to shake the formula up. Seeing how the AI changes in relation to these new systems and modern upgrades. A few of my thoughts on what can be done for the story, and an examination on what aspects should receive the most focus, as well as an estimation of what the project as a whole would cost. So, first things first, let's look at what features are returning, or at least an aspect of them. When it comes to level design, I think we can employ two different philosophies. Enclosed levels would be more in line with previous entries, linear puzzles that the player has to solve through the smart use of their squad, simply fighting from point A to point B. Open levels would be more experimental. You can look to the levels from Medal of Honor Airborne or the lanes from a MOBA. The first level of Medal of Honor Airborne is a series of linear branches that connect to a hub area that can be tackled in any order. Other levels could be far more open and encourage the player to find their own way through, making it great for more sandbox-like gameplay. It's certainly a bigger challenge in terms of designing them, but they can be a chance for players to experiment in how they handle threats and navigate beyond finding all the enemies from point A to point B. The recon map is a staple of the series, but in my opinion, it is one that has been quite underdeveloped. So I mostly believe that to be a matter of execution rather than the idea of it. Like before, this map will display the player's immediate surroundings as well as any points of interest. Said points of interest include the player themselves, their allies, any spotted enemies, nearby goals, and pickups. I'll get into pickups later. One distinct difference I would like this map to have is that it no longer pauses or slows the game when you use it. It's as if in the middle of the battle the player is pulling out an actual map to monitor the situation, which I think is an interesting element that forces the player to make decisions under the duress of an evolving situation, leading to more frantic, interesting game engagements. A returning feature from Hell's Highway is destructible cover. That being said, how it's used should be a bit different. I found that cover in Hell's Highway could feel a bit too angular and inorganic, making it too easy to shoot enemies behind cover due to a lack of bumps and randomness in the construction of things like fencing. What constitutes as destructible should largely be the same, though. Light cover is anything that can be destroyed by something as simple as conventional gunfire. Wood fences were the previous favorite for this mechanic, so for this entry, we should look at using a more diverse pool of light cover options to keep things visually interesting. Anything made from flat wood beyond fences work just fine, but the player should also be able to shoot through things like thin sheets of metal, thin interior walls, and some foliage, all of which breaks apart in realistic ways. There is also heavy cover, which can only be fully destroyed with explosive weapons like grenades and tank shells. Stone fences, sandbags, and certain walls and buildings are vulnerable, but I think they should be at least partially destructible by gunfire. High caliber gunfire should be able to chip at the edges of this cover, but to take down the main mass of the cover, the player would need to use explosives. It is important to note that indestructible cover would also exist and would be impervious to any and all damage. Now, we would adopt the camera system of Hell's Highway over previous styles. While we would lose the immersive quality of keeping the whole game in first person, the ability to transition to a third person camera is immensely beneficial to the tactical side of combat, both in gaining awareness of one's surroundings and also accurately giving orders to teams from relative safety. This third person camera would also be engaged when using an MG, either a conventionally mounted one or the tank mounted one, which we will get into later. Now, it wouldn't be a Brothers in Arms game without the teams that the player commands. I find that their implementation in earlier games can be a bit uneven. They often felt interchangeable, and I already voiced my thoughts on the Bazooka team from Hell's Highway. So my thought was, how can we make each team distinct but balanced? I will lay out each team here, but I will share what really makes each one unique a bit later. The Assault team, like before, excels at advancing on enemy positions and flanking them. They make for the ideal cleanup crew, and also the ability to throw grenades when they get close enough to an enemy's position is something I want to see return, but in this case, it would be exclusive to the Assault team. Scout teams work best at suppressing the enemy, and in exchange, they are generally less effective at killing exposed enemies. Luckily, they have the best effective range by far. However, another limitation is they can't even destroy light cover, which makes them seem weak now, but again, I will get into what makes this team stand out in a bit. We're not done yet, though. There's also the Engineer team. They excel at destroying cover, but their basic suppression can be a bit lacking, and that's if you can get them into range. That being said, light cover is like paper to them, and they are able to chip away at heavy cover with high caliber weapons, which can offer slight openings for the player to take advantage of. As for the tank team, they function like they did in Earned in Blood. Instead of its own dedicated section, the player will command the tank like a team. As such, its explosive weaponry can make short order of most enemies, and its armor can be effectively used as mobile cover for the player and other ally units, so long as the player can keep it safe from enemy explosives, since the tank can't generally heal during a mission. Another returning feature is the top-mounted MG. The player will be able to hop on top of the tank and use this MG at any time, though it very much leaves the player exposed to enemy fire, so positioning is important. How many teams you can control at once varies from game to game, mission to mission, but I want to make a more intentional approach to the idea. While the majority of the game will stick to the traditional squad size of 1 or 2, I think that much like Hell's Highway, we can expand upon it. At certain points in the game, the level size should expand to accommodate 3 teams or shrink to allow only one single team member to fight with the player. The open levels I mentioned earlier would be the ideal candidate for this idea. Heck, it might even be possible to give the player control over all 4 teams, though that idea would need to go through playtesting first to ensure it doesn't overwhelm the player. Now, a good team would be nothing without enemies to fight against. We can start with the most common enemy type, standard teams. They would be equipped with machine guns that are generally effective at most ranges. Nothing really makes them stand out, but they fill space and are still dangerous to exposed allies. Then there is the MG team, which have ranged from broken to being a non-issue across games. What we want is an MG more in line with Earned in Blood. Frontal assaults should be difficult, even with suppression, but at the same time, the player should never face instant death if they are caught out in the open by one. But it doesn't end there. Shock teams are an addition that will make combat encounters a bit more dynamic. They carry rifles, and if they get close enough to your tank, they will throw anti-tank grenades. I'll explain why when we get to AI. Enemy tank teams are similar to the player's own, with a few differences. Their MG is built into the front, so effective flanking is important for units of all sizes. While explosives can damage it from any angle, explosive shots to the front do considerably less damage than shots to the back or sides. Luckily, the daring player can also choose to plant a satchel charge on the tank itself to destroy it instantly. There is still one more enemy team, though, the artillery team. They control an 88 or similar piece of artillery that shoots explosive shots at any target within its sightline, though slightly inaccurately, making it more effective at taking out charging allied tanks rather than the player and other small units. That being said, it's not wise to take up destructible cover in its sightline for too long. Otherwise, it will zero in and eventually land an accurate shot. The player may occasionally encounter an objective to destroy these. Now, none of these teams would be effective without the weapons they carry, so let's get into that. Though, remember that this is not a comprehensive list and is open to additions, subtractions, starting with rifles. Single action and accurate. I would say that American weapons should be slightly better than German weapons from a mechanical standpoint, since ammo would be more limited for them. Then we have machine guns, fully automatic and much less accurate. Both rifles and machine guns would be considered primary weapons. Keen eyes may also see a distinct lack of the MG42. In my version of the game, MGs cannot be picked up. They can only be used in the place where they were deployed, as well as the allied tank, though I'll get into why that's not as limiting as you think later on. Finally, we have the pistols, the secondary option. I would say they need a slight accuracy upgrade, but otherwise they are absolutely a last resort weapon, unless the player is especially keen on saving ammo for their other guns. Accuracy can be an interesting thing to discuss in each game. Heal 30 and Earned in Blood kept the player inaccurate, especially when using sustained fire. This encouraged the player to focus on suppression until they got into an ideal position to take out the enemy. Though if the player is too inaccurate, the guns can end up feeling like crap to use. Hell's Highway, on the other hand, I would say overcorrected and made the player too accurate, making them too effective at taking out enemies without the need to suppress or seek advantageous positions. As for what I would do for this game, I would say to generally stick to a formula. Accurate shots should take time to achieve, but no shot should be perfectly accurate. Bloom should also be in effect to encourage the player to space out their shots, at least when they want to be accurate. Close range machine gun fire on a flanked position is always enjoyable when you don't have to care so much about accuracy. Overall, we are looking for something akin to Earned in Blood, but playtesting will ultimately decide the best balance. Stealth has always been an underdeveloped aspect of the games. The player would simply try their best to position their units before they are either immediately caught or they start opening fire. So, how do we change that? It would generally be the same as before. When entering a new area, the squad is effectively in stealth. This stealth would remain until they are spotted or they initiate their attack. However, though conventional methods can be boring, in this case I would say it's necessary and effective. So I say, give the enemies alert meters that fill up when the player or their team members are in open line of sight. This would give the player some grace when finding ideal cover for themselves and their squad, without making it so overpowered that the player can just sneak completely around most encounters. Enemies themselves have some semblance of stealth by the fact that their suppression meter doesn't appear over their heads until they are clearly spotted. So new enemies coming from around some far off corner can in fact accidentally ambush the player. I may be called an old soul for this, but I would love to see a return to extras in games, and Brothers in Arms had some interesting ones. These extras should be awards for players who are able to complete missions with no casualties, with even bigger rewards for beating them on higher difficulties. This encourages the player to replay and conquer levels, upping the game's value. Like in past entries, extras should be things like historical stories, concept art, and other behind-the-scenes materials. But one extra I would love to see over any other one is the return of cheats. While we don't have to do cheat codes specifically, I think making cheats a reward for stellar play would be a major force of encouragement for the player. These cheats could be simple cosmetic swaps, like using the OG character models, or something gameplay affecting, like unlimited ammo. So, remember how I've kept saying we should explore some ideas later? Now is when we do that. These are the ideas that I feel will help evolve the franchise and fix some of the issues I had with earlier iterations. One second. The biggest addition to my game is the trust system. But what is the trust system? Well, fans may remember that by the end of Hell's Highway, some of Baker's secrets were revealed, leading to a rift between him and some of his men at the end. So, where do we go from there? Part of the trust system involves building trust with each of your teams, repairing this rift between Baker's squad, and with this trust, the player will unlock upgrades for their teams as well as new dialogue options / choices that can affect how the player navigates missions and the story, perhaps in some highly consequential ways. Now, regarding those choices, the player will, on occasion, be given a choice that could affect their mission and/or team. It can be something like choosing one soldier for a job over another, choosing one plan over another, or perhaps having to make a tough call in leaving a soldier behind. Despite adding this element of consequential choice, we wouldn't want to do something too drastic. After all, part of the charm of the Brothers in Arms games is their historical accuracy. And we also wouldn't want to permanently nerf a team by killing a team member off. Or at least we wouldn't want to pull that sort of trick too early. But this is not the only type of choice the player will get to make. The player will also make gameplay choices. These choices have a more palpable effect on gameplay and can greatly change how you carry out your mission. Perhaps you can decide what to bring with you on a mission. Perhaps it's choosing which specific team to take along. It could be something as drastic as playing an entirely different mission or taking an all new route to the objective. Much like Baker, all these choices are about putting pressure on the player. The pressure to make the right call, even when there is no right call. Let the player share in Baker's responsibility and the pain that comes with it. Trust is a difficult thing to build, but there is a way to build it. Throughout the game, the player will be given optional objectives. The way this would work is that between missions, the player will usually have a moment to walk around and talk with their teams, bond with them. Throughout the game, each team is going through their own mini story that these interactions develop. This also helps fix one of my pet peeves from the previous games, that being the lack of development for a lot of the characters outside of Baker and a few others. Now everyone has a chance to stand out and bond with the player. Usually, at least one of these conversations will play out in a cutscene that results in the player being given an optional objective to complete during the next mission. The completion of this objective will further develop that team's story and increase their level of trust. As for what you can do with this trust, outside of how it affects the story, higher trust levels with a team result in new abilities that a team can utilize. I've previously mentioned how I thought teams felt too similar in earlier games. Well, this is my way of making each team more functionally distinct, starting with the assault team. The first trust upgrade the player unlocks for each team will almost always be ammo pickup. This allows the team to give the player a refill on their American weapons at least once per mission, which is partially inspired by ammo sharing from Earned in Blood. And again, American weapons are generally better since you're unlikely to find extra ammo for them out in the field. It also sets it up so that in the early game, you are more likely to swap to German weapons, but later on, you can more confidently use American ones. Though, as you can see, pickups won't count. Again, I'll explain what pickups are a bit later. The second ability for Assault is Heads Down. Working in tandem with the previously mentioned Stealth Overhaul, the team will be allowed to re-engage stealth. If used cleverly, this can offer assault teams the chance to gain a lot of ground on an entrenched enemy. Sorry, but since enemy detection is fairly sensitive, the player is more likely going to use it to draw fire away from assault so that they can quickly move to some piece of cover that would normally be out of their reach without that detection grace period. The third and arguably most powerful assault ability is Final Charge. The ability to order your units to charge was absent from Hell's Highway, but the charge order did always have issues. Most notably, it often put your team in a lot of danger since they would just charge directly into whatever was ahead, leading to teammates taking needless damage, which in earlier games would stack up as the mission went on. To fix this, not only have I limited the use of the ability to just the assault team, but when they use it, they are rendered temporarily invincible. Though it is important to note that all team members must be alive for the ability to work, which is the same requirement for all rank 3 abilities. Now, as for the scout team, like before, they will first unlock ammo pickup, then they will unlock precision fire. Playing up their role in suppressing the enemy, this ability acts as a super suppression that completely shuts down enemies, including the normally stubborn MG team. It also works instantly, so it's useful in an emergency when your units are caught out in the open. To go one step beyond that, ability 3 is saturation fire. So long as all team members are alive, this ability allows the scout team to suppress 2 teams at the same time for a short period, making it great for crowd control or just shooting an exposed team while suppressing another. The engineer team's upgrades were to improve its position as a utility tool. Again, we have ammo pickup, and here we have MG emplacement. This ability lets the engineer set down an MG on their cover spots, which both they and the player can use. This gives the player the power of an MG without letting them go crazy with it. And as you can imagine, MGs are quite good at mulching cover. But what's even more effective at destroying cover is their last ability, Explosive Shot. This ability has the engineer team fire an explosive projectile that blows up any destructible cover, though it does so without hurting the people using it. This sets up the player and their teams to finish off whoever is using said cover, and unlike grenades, they have unlimited range. Though it is important to note that they do not damage tanks and have limited charges per mission. The tank only has 2 upgrades, but they are important ones. First off, we have, and you guessed it, a permanent upgrade for the mounted MG. One of the issues with the tank MG from the early games was the lack of 360 aim. This would fix that and provide a bit more cover from enemy gunfire. The other upgrade is for the tank's armor, giving it side panels that make it more resistant to damage from the side, thus making flanks less of a threat. In terms of actually controlling your squad, the Brothers in Arms games have always been a bit more limited, at least when compared to other tactical shooters. That being said, there is one bit of extra control I would like to include that I think would add some extra depth to gameplay while maintaining its action leanings. It starts with the setup, which is the player's ability to delay any order they give to their squad. This delay then goes into the execution. On the player's command, any order that was previously set up is executed all at once. That being said, only one order can be set up at a time per team. This feature allows players to set up things like ambushes where allied teams fire all at once instead of having to individually order their teams around as the fighting starts. It can also allow you to optimally plan movements beforehand in case you later move to a less advantageous spot to deliver orders. Now, besides ordering teams to move and shoot, each team will also have special tasks that they can do, and all of which the player can do as well, though less effectively. Assault teams have the option of planting satchel charges. This can be used to blow up certain pieces of cover, artillery emplacements, and even enemy tanks. Though, like all tasks, this takes a moment or two to do. Meanwhile, the scout team can rescue injured soldiers and civilians, which bestows the whole squad with a small heal, including the normally unrepairable tank. As for the other teams, the engineer team can clear out piles of rubble. This can open up new routes for the player to use, or even open up secret areas with special items. Then there's the tank, which can, of course, do nothing. Now, I would say that tanks already have a fair share of utility outside of their pure killing potential, and that's what these squad techs are all about, giving each team some level of utility that's unique to them. I've mentioned the idea of healing before, but no game in the series has done it in the way I want to do it. I suggest a combination of the old game's regenerative health and limited health systems to form a segmented health system, allowing for health that can only regenerate up to a certain point. Now, the reason I suggest this approach is because the previous games ran into different problems with their systems. Hill 30 and Earn Blood had limited health, which could not be restored for the entirety of a mission, unless the player died too many times. This turned missions into marathons that progressively got harder if you made too many mistakes early on. I would say that Hell's Highway somewhat overcorrected on this issue. The game would fully restore all teams after each major checkpoint, and the player had regenerative health. This reinforces my earlier complaint that the player in Hell's Highway could be too reckless with their own life, thus making the use of teams less important. Now, my health system would apply to both the player and their teammates, striking a balance between the marathon play and the reckless play. Except for tanks, which I previously said can't regenerate. Now, this system only works as well as it does when we get health kits involved. Yes, these medkits would relieve some of that marathon feel, making it so that the player can at least partially bounce back from any mistakes they make. That being said, medpacks are limited and are full restore only. No revives if a teammate is killed. This creates a sort of risk-reward situation where the player has to not only decide who to use the medkit on, but also when to use it. Use it too early, and it feels like a waste of a medpack. Wait too long, however, and you risk dying yourself or losing a teammate for the rest of the mission. That's what makes the scout team's ability to save civilians especially useful, as it provides a small, squad-wide heal. Excuse me 1 second. Sorry about that. Now, after all this talk of pickups, let's finally get into them. We, of course, have the medpack. These can only be carried by the player and only 3 at a time. However, they exist in their own slot, so they do not stop the player from grabbing other pickups. Then we have the sniper. This does not take up a weapon slot and can be used by either the player or one of their teams. The sniper is the only perfectly accurate gun in the game and can insta-kill any infantry. However, it only contains 5 shots. which cannot be refilled. The player can use it as they normally would in a shooter, but when given to a team, the player can order them to use it on a specific target. And as you can see, it's a similar case for our next pickup, the Panzerfaust. It functions like the sniper, but it instead fires an explosive with some drop-off to limit its range. It's also one of the few viable means of damaging a tank. Now, similar to medpacks, grenades have their own slot and can only be used by the player, not including the assault team's natural ability to throw grenades when they get into range of an enemy. The player's grenade is functionally identical, except they have full control of how it is thrown and are only able to carry so many at once. One neat addition I would like to see is the inclusion of a permadeath mode. This would be a toggle goal separate from difficulty options. And what it would do is make player deaths campaign ending. But more than that, it would make the combat death of teammates permanent for the rest of the campaign. Now, this would have to not affect the story, at least for the most part, but gameplay-wise, you would not be able to use those team members for the rest of your campaign. It's especially ruthless, since you need to have a full team in order to use your rank 3 abilities. Now, since we are talking about a tactical shooter, we should probably move on to the AI. In terms of enemy behavior, we have, of course, the standard team. They are relatively uncomplicated by design. They will simply find cover, try to hold it, and if they are exposed or flanked, they will most often retreat to whatever cover is away from the threat. Then there is the MG, which will hold its ground no matter what. Even if they are exposed, they will simply remove themselves from their MG gun and fire back at the threat without concern for themselves. As for the other enemy teams, the shock team likes to stay under the radar. They will focus on flanking the enemy and their allies in order to create the most havoc. If they think they have a shot at the player's tank, they will get in close enough to throw their anti-tank grenades. If they are spotted and exposed, instead of retreating, they will find the nearest cover available no matter where that cover is. If they see an opportunity, they will continue their advance. With the tank team, they will usually wander a bit until they catch sight of a target. If a target is within their line of sight, they will usually face towards it and hold their ground while laying down fire. This can be interrupted by closer targets or targets that are flanking it, especially ones using explosive force. Both its main gun and MG usually focus on the same thing, though the MG can generally fire on an acquired target faster. Lastly, we have the artillery team. If just one of the units in a team dies, they will retreat to the best of their ability, moving from cover to cover to minimize their exposure. They are cowards. On the player's side of things, we have the squad AI. While I would say that they function quite well in previous games, I think there is room for improvement. I know I would want to see some improvements after so many years since the last game. So, much like before, the AI will usually take care of themselves within the confines of the player's orders. They take cover from enemy fire when placed near it, they fire back on anything firing on them, if they are not directed at a specific target. The usual. Now, one improvement I would like to see is the use of cover while they are in motion. If squad members are moving around near cover, they should have the intuition to keep their heads down while doing it to minimize shots against them. In other games, I could often feel like they didn't know how to protect themselves unless you were micromanaging their movements. And to that effect, the path your team will follow when moving should show as you are directing them and while they are moving. Sort of like what you would see in something like XCOM, you know? As for the tank team, they will usually handle themselves in all ways except movement. But if the player is currently using the mounted MG, then the player becomes more responsible for the tank's direction and what targets it shoots. Now, this might be a big ask. But I want to see a difficulty slider that does more than just raise a few numbers up. Sorry. While we mostly see settings that adjust the damage and accuracy of the enemies and shooters, I want to see something more sophisticated here. So, how about instead, we adjust the complexity of the enemy AI? This would mean that at higher difficulties, the enemy would become more ruthless and would execute their rules more efficiently and effectively. I would say smart AI is a major draw for any tactical game, not just shooters. Now that we've gotten through the mechanics and overall design of my game idea, let's talk about some of the things I would like to see happen story-wise. So yeah, we are returning from a pretty big cliffhanger. And although I have done a lot to develop a framework so far, I would say that the overall best course of action would be to leave the story to the writers. Brothers in Arms is more than just characters. It's a setting and all the historical facts that are needed to support that setting. While I am certainly up to the task of working on this side of things, even the research aspects, in this particular part of the game, I want to respect the collaborative joy of game development. Although it most certainly has to take place at the Battle of the Bulge. That being said, I do have at least a few suggestions. I would say, thematically, the Brothers in Arms games have all been fairly similar, even if the approach changes. And as I've said before, it deals with war, brotherhood, the emotional weight of leadership, but with the addition of trust as a mechanic, I would say that this game should make trust a major thematic point in its story. Helps keep things synergized. One thing I want to see return is the frailty of Baker's psyche, because Hell's Highway showed us that he really is on the edge of sanity right now, and that is a thread that must be explored further in the sequel. Now, the first way we do this is with the very start of the game. Brothers in Arms games typically separate their recap and tutorial sections, but I would say the most effective and efficient way to do it for this game would be to combine the two into one. And I say the best way to do that would be through an opening nightmare section. Although it is a bit cliche from a writing standpoint, I think a section like this would be the best way to quickly tutorialize the player while bringing them up to speed on the story, as well as setting up the themes and mood of the game. Not to mention, it gives us a deeper insight into the mind of Baker at this point. We'll see all the biggest moments from the previous games, the deaths of teammates, the triumphs, and how everything weighs down on him. I'm even open to using this section as an opportunity to really flesh out Baker's father, or at least his thoughts on him. A lot of surreal psychological possibilities exist in this approach. The other major plot device I want to introduce is a letter. Let's say Baker wakes up from his nightmare. He's a bit out of sorts, struggling to get out of bed, and instead of the normal narration we get from him, we instead get a voiceover. It is him dictating the contents of a letter he is writing to Red Hartsock, his best friend who was sent back home after a catastrophic injury in the last game. This would be the writer's opportunity to bring the player up to speed on current events while offering more of Baker's own insights on the situation. For an extra bit of cinematic quality, we could see the other members of Baker's squad as he passes by them to deliver the letter. Deliver it to the postage station or postage box, introducing us to the faces of our teammates. However, at the end, we see that Baker didn't go through with delivering the letter. Now, what makes this an interesting plot device is that throughout the game, the player is delivering voiceovers in the form of letter dictations to Red, a letter he can't bear to send due to his own guilt and conflicted feelings. Returning from Earned in Blood, I would also like to see Baker have these slow down moments during gameplay where he delivers VO on the current situation. However, I would be more careful not to overdo it on the VOs. Players don't always appreciate stopping the game to deliver stories. Plus, overdoing it would diminish the emotions of it. I would say the conclusion of the letter should tie into Baker's ending. I've gone back and forth between whether or not the ending decides if Baker finally delivers the letter or not, but ultimately I think the best course of action would be whether or not Baker lives to see a letter that Red wrote to him. Baker was taking so long to send his letter that Red decided to send his own letter, telling Baker about life back home and giving some words of comfort to Baker that ultimately put his guilty feelings to rest. I think that would be the most emotional and satisfying way to end the story of these games. But it's not just guilt that Baker has to deal with. I want to see a return of the hallucinations that Hell's Highway had. But I want to take it one step further. I say we should look to what Spec Ops Line did if we want to come up with the most effective hallucinations. These would be both subtle and super unsubtle to put the player in the head of Baker's fracturing mind. As the Battle of the Bulge intensifies, Baker's hallucinations would probably worsen. I could see Baker having a full-blown panic attack over a close teammate dying, like Mac or Paddock. Now, the ending would be more than just a letter. I would say the choices the player made, combined with their team's trust levels, would impact the ending in some way. We can do something binary, like a good and bad ending, or perhaps a variety of factors that are affected, like the outcome of individual units or teams, sort of like how the Fallout games do their endings. That being said, no matter what the choice, Baker's death should be decided by the trust system. It helps tie everything together and encourages the player to get to know their team, since that's what builds trust. Now that we've gone through the actual design of the game itself, we need to discuss the more logistical side of game development. As you can probably be parsed by what we've covered before, single player is a big one. In fact, I would say it is the single most important part of the game. The thing we have to get right above all else, and as such, the most resources should go into it. Now, part of the reason for that focus is that single player has always been the franchise's biggest draw, so it's what most fans want to see. Story would be the main thing to get right, but by virtue of its game mechanics, we would also need to greatly focus on making improvements to the AI and the level design. As long as nothing else strays too far from expectations, other aspects can remain lower on the priority list. Now, a game like this one I have in mind should be around 10 to 15 hours long, Lengthy as far as shooters go, but since we are putting extra emphasis on the story, we will need those extra hours to really achieve the optimal pacing and to flesh things out, especially when it comes to the many characters I want to cover. Game mechanics may wear thin, but this can always be mitigated by clever level design or special levels that deviate outside the normal mechanics and expectations. Like how the tank sections or the asylum level of Hell's Highway mixed things up. Multiplayer is a bit more of a complicated question, one that I ultimately recommend against. But let me go over the pros and cons regardless. On the positive side of things, a multiplayer mode would give players a more diverse package to play through. And by virtue of this, it would create more mass market appeal and longevity. But it would also put it in more direct competition with other shooters. And of course, we couldn't have a AAA game without microtransactions. Though I bring it up now to mostly say that I am adamantly against the use of microtransactions. I merely bring it up here as a pro from a money standpoint, not a consumer standpoint. Now, when it comes to cons, the creation of a quality multiplayer mode, would be risky due to the aforementioned competition, and it would also eat up a great deal of the budget. Like, there's a reason Call of Duty and the like cost so much, and it's a lot of that money goes into the multiplayer specifically. It would also take development focus away from the crucial single player, which I've already said is the game's main core. It is also a fact that the mechanics that I've laid out here do not translate well to a multiplayer setting, at least not a traditional one. Lastly, we have to look at the multiplayer of Hell's Highway to see how receptive shooter audiences are to a Brothers in Arms multiplayer mode, and it's not particularly good. Now, on the other hand, there is a game mode that I think would fare much better if we pour some resources into it. When it comes to pros, a co-op campaign would do the same thing as the multiplayer mode by adding more value to the whole package. Additionally, its mechanics would need much less tinkering to work properly. It could even be used to prop up the single player story, which we have already established is the core of this game. However, it does still fall into some of the same pitfalls as multiplayer, though I would consider it less costly and risky. It would still be a major use of resources, though. And of course, it would still take time. It would take some of the resources away from the single player. But as it is something I still recommend including, let's go a bit more into what that would look like. Earned in Blood actually had a co-op mode, so it would work as a decent template. It would be exclusively two-player co-op, where each player acts as their own team leader, working together through a unique story. Each player would be given command of their own team, though I think it would be interesting if before a mission starts, the players can discuss which one of them will receive which available teams. As it would be a unique campaign, levels will need to be special made to account for the new dynamic. From a story standpoint, it can act as either a standalone story or something parallel to the single player story. Now, a good game is only half the battle. We also have to convince people that this is the game they've been waiting so long to play. I would argue that Brothers in Arms 4 needs to take a similar approach to what Alan Wake 2 did, both in budget and tone. For the most impact, I would say the optimal announcement would be at the Game Awards. They've been growing year after year, and if the Okami announcement proves anything, it's that it's a good place to announce the return of a long forgotten franchise. As for the focus of this marketing campaign, I would obviously go with the single player story. It's what fans want the most, and one of the things that Alan Wake 2's marketing campaign did right was cater to fans, which in turn spread their infectious enthusiasm to newcomers, engaging their curiosity, and with that curiosity, we can draw these newcomers in with the things that make Brothers in Arms stand out from the competition. Not just its story, but its unique blend of action and tactical gameplay. But you can't make or market a game without a whole lot of money, especially in the AAA space. Now, I will freely admit my ignorance on the matter, especially since game budget can often be vaguely defined on the internet. That being said, I would say the production level we should strive for is somewhere around Call of Duty World War II and God of War Ragnarok. Games at the top of their fields in terms of polish, fidelity, and cinematic feel. Now, from what I gather, this would put the ideal budget range around 175 to 200 million dollars. This is very much an estimate on my part, and is likely to stray from that as soon as those smarter than me make their own estimates. On the other hand, I do think that with a budget like this, we would be able to make the best possible game. Since we are not doing multiplayer or an excessively long RPG campaign, a lot of that extra money can go into the primary focuses of the game, as well as the marketing. The framework I have provided here should also hopefully save a great deal of time and money, especially if deviation from it is kept to a minimum. So, that is the game I have envisioned. But what would it look like in motion? How about we go through a little demonstration to see how these different mechanics would ideally play out and interact with one another? Let's lay out the scene. It's December 1944. German forces are laying siege to the Belgian town of Bastogne and the surrounding area. One village north of Bastogne is Noville, pictured here. For the time being, it is being held by around 400 men and a handful of tanks under Major William de Sobry. German forces have been ruthless, but de Sobry's men have held the line, at least for now. All of this is part of the Germans' larger Ardennes of counteroffensive, which threatens to completely halt the Allies. To counteract this offensive, the 101st Airborne Division are called to aid in the defense of the area, which is where Baker's squad comes in. Just as units from the 101st arrive in Bastogne, Baker and his squad are ordered to assist the 506th in the defense and possible evacuation of Noville. And that is where our demonstration begins. Noville is a strategic crossroads that must be captured before the Germans can lay full siege to Bastogne. De Sobry and his forces are being attacked from the north and east of the town, and it might very well be on its last legs. This is a rough layout of Noville. The black lines are visible roads, and the blue lines mark buildings. And the green lines designate tree lines and forests. But if we zoom in, we can see reinforcements approaching the town, including Baker's squad. And with them are his 4 trusty teams. Now, for the purposes of the demonstration, they will have their full suite of upgrades. Though if the Battle of Noville were to be adapted in the game, it would have to occur, quite early in the story. First, we have Baker himself, the player. His spirits are not especially high, knowing that he and his men are once again on the line just a few months after the failures of Market Garden. But he will still do all he can for his men. Then there is the assault team. Excellent for advancing on enemy positions and cleaning them up. The scout team excels at fixing enemies in place and generally managing crowds. The engineer team has a bit more utility since their setup allows them to destroy cover and hold positions with ease. Lastly, we have the tank. Perfect for punching holes in squishy lines and providing cover for wandering units, so long as there's nothing to punch holes in it. These men have just arrived to help Noville, but things already seem dire. The dead lay about the debris, the husks of tanks burn against the cold skies, but they still have a job to do. Not long after arriving, they are able to make contact with Major de Sobri, but as they do, the next German assault has begun, splitting de Sobri's forces across multiple roads into town. Pleasantries will have to wait, as he orders you and your men to provide assistance where you can. Now, in this situation, we have the run of the land. We can freely command our men within this play area, letting us carve our own route towards 3 different objectives. Though the layout of the village forms a natural bottleneck, or bottlenecks and lanes to help in the smart construction of the level. Now, what makes this a truly open level is that the 3 objectives can be tackled in any order, with the level able to account for those possibilities. In this situation, we'll say that our tank and engineer teams were taken by de Sobri, so we will use our assault and scout teams for this mission. However, I would actually like to skip ahead. Hooray! We managed to hold the line at the different crossroads. But the Germans have launched a surprise flanking maneuver to the southeast. We will rally with our other teams and figure out what to do next. De Sobri can't spare the extra men to fight the flank, so he is relying on Baker and his men to get the job done. And here, we get a choice. This choice will affect how we approach this mission, as well as how we actually start it. We could choose to hold our ground together and face the full force of the German charge, waiting until we get the perfect opportunity to counterattack. Or we can leave some of our men here and use our other teams to initiate a flank on the flank. It is this choice that will determine how many teams we will have with us, how many enemies we will face, as well as how we will start the mission. But for the sake of showing everything off, we'll go ahead and go with the bigger job of defending the town. So let's see how an actual mission would play out. We are now at the southeast of the map. Our men will be holed up just across this bridge on the edge of the village, while the enemy tries to cross over. If they get past us, it could spell the end of Noville. Now, one of the enemies we will see are standard teams, designated with a square. We also have the flanking shock team, shown with the X, the enemy's own line-busting tanks, and though we won't see them in this charge, the enemy will later bring in artillery, shown with the diamond, and MG teams, shown with the little machine gun symbol. I would normally say that a mission like this should be restricted to 3 ally teams of the player's choosing, such as choosing between your assault team or your scout team. But for the sake of showing everyone off, we will just keep everyone together. Though I would suspect that in the actual game, this setup would be slightly overwhelming. Now, if we return to the map layouts, we can see that the enemies have a good bit of forestry and a few buildings covering their approach. So they are likely to get somewhat close before our units are able to fire on them. Our advantage, though, is that they have to cross the bridge in order for their flank to succeed. But before we get to the defense, let's establish a few things. The yellow lines here will designate light cover. As we established, this is cover that can be destroyed with even light gunfire, not the most reliable. Covering some of that in orange, we have heavy cover. This is cover that can only be destroyed with explosive weapons. Then there is indestructible cover in pink. When designing a level, there should always be enough indestructible cover that if you blew up all other cover, you would still have at least some means of advancement. It is essential for both the enemy and the player's defense. Designated with white X's, which you can especially see in the top right, as well as the 2 spots in the lower center area. These can be extra med kits and grenades, or something more powerful like a sniper or Panzerfaust. The neon green, which you can see at the bottom in one of the field houses, shows spots where a squad task can be performed. This can be satchel charges, helping injured civilians / soldiers, and clearing debris. When we make our counterattack, these will be the enemy placements, which may seem overwhelming now, but we will tackle it when we get to it. We still have a defense to get to, after all. Now, zooming in on the area we will be holding, I've gone ahead and fleshed out the area a bit more. A few more pickups, lining off the play area, and adding some squad tasks. As previously stated, we will only be facing enemy tanks, standards, and shocks during this defense. So, let's get started. Before the enemy starts its attack, we will order our tanks around. We will send our engineer team to clear debris out of the nearby building's entrance. We will send our assault team to plant a satchel charge at this wall of foliage. Both of these tasks could also be done by the player, though slightly less efficiently. As for the scout team, we will have them plant their feet behind some indestructible cover and have the tank hold back for the moment. We, the player, will rush towards the pickup on the left here. Lucky for us, we managed to pick up a medkit. And now that all that debris and such has been cleared, we have a lot more room to maneuver, including a little hidey hole for our tank behind the tree line. We also managed to uncover 2 more pickups, which we will give to our assault and scout teams. The engineer team will take position on our left. Now, our assault team, now equipped with a Panzerfaust, will take position on the right, while our scouts, now equipped with a sniper, will take a window in the building. But as you can see on the left, we have ordered our engineer team to use one of their abilities by planting down an MG. The engineer team will use the emplacements until ordered otherwise, or until it runs out of ammo. The player can also use it if they choose to do so. We have just enough time to prepare before the first wave of enemies approaches us. On the right, 2 standard enemies charge towards us, sticking close to cover as long as it doesn't slow them down. As they get into range, we order the assault and scout teams to suppress one of them, while we ourselves wipe out the other team as they scramble between cover. Standard units aren't really dangerous to our tank, so we bring it out of its hiding spot and launch one shot at the remaining team. taking out all the units in one go. Just as we finish off the first wave, the second one appears along the left route. This time, 2 standard teams are joined by a shock team. And in response, we begin moving our tank into position. But we decide to also hop on top of it to use its MG. The combined MGs from the player and the engineer teams wipe out the standard teams charging across the open field, but the shock team sticks to the cover along the road during its approach. Luckily, our scout team has the perfect angle, so we order them to use their sniper to take the shocks out. The dust clears, but a group of enemies soon charges through the heavily covered center. A shock team and a tank. The enemy tank manages to stay out of the line of fire just long enough to get a direct shot on our engineering team, destroying their MG and a bit of the cover they were using. This unfortunately also injures one of the engineers and provides enough of a disruption that the shock team can run in unopposed. The tank moves further in, but before it can get another shot off, our assault team uses their Panzerfaust shots on its flank, destroying it. The shock team still manages to use the chaos to get even closer. As for our poor injured engineer team, we'll use our medkit to heal them to full. The shock team moves into the perfect position to start firing into our allied units, but one thing he didn't account for was the tank that just got an angle to fire on them. Now desperate, the enemies launch one final attack, and to our surprise, 2 standard teams manage to cross the water to flank our position on the left. We also have 2 incoming tanks, 2 shock teams, and another standard team from the left and right lanes. On the left, the 2 flanking standards charge towards our position. We move our assault team in since they are adept at taking out exposed groups, meaning they can easily take care of both enemy teams before they can reach cover. We, on the other hand, take advantage of our tank's MG to shoot down the shock team, while our tank's main gun fires on and destroys the enemy tank. The enemies on the right make their own progress towards our position, so to slow them down, we use our scout's double suppress ability to suppress the shock and standard teams at the same time. The enemy tank, however, continues unimpeded. Without support, our scout team is fired on by the enemy tank. Our own tank lies in wait, so it doesn't take on any unhealable damage. Meanwhile, our engineer team decides to use their special ability to blow up the heavy cover that the shock team is using, leaving them open for the engineers to finish them off. The enemy tank uses this opportunity to charge through the bridge and secure its victory. But instead of using our tank for a flanking maneuver, we decide to use one more ace up our sleeve. We order everyone to take cover, and before the tank can react, we tell our assault team to use its invincible charge ability. The tank's weapons can do nothing as the assault units run towards it and plant a satchel charge, which, after a few moments, detonates and destroys the tank instantly. Alright, we have successfully fought off the enemy assaults, but we still need to hunt down any stragglers that managed to fortify whatever ground they gained. So it's time to go on the offensive. But before we charge in, we get a moment to talk with our squad. During this intermission, we can walk around and talk to our men in each team. One of these teams, let's say the scout team, tells us that some civilians got trapped in the buildings up ahead and that are now under German control. This will play into the personal story of this team, which develops throughout the whole game. We now have a bonus objective to save, the civilians during the next mission, which, on completion, will result in an increase of trust with the scout team at the end of said mission. Though, in this scenario, everyone already has all of their abilities unlocked, so it doesn't matter quite as much. So let's begin our assault. As you can see, since this is a more open level, we can approach the situation as we see fit. Our objective is to simply clear the map, with the addition of saving any civilians we come across. One viable route is to stick to the right of the map. It's straightforward, but the cover layouts, enemy MG, and tank make advancement a bit difficult. Through the center, we would have better cover to use, but the overwhelming enemy firepower would be difficult to tackle all at once. Plus, the claustrophobic environment would make maneuvering our tank difficult. A death sentence when finding an enemy tank and an artillery placement at the same time. The left side has a lot more room to run, but is equally lacking in solid cover. And while the road makes for a convenient route to flank, it is also partially vulnerable to flanking from enemies in the center. For the purposes of our demonstration, though, let's tackle the right side. And we'll do that in just a second. Sorry again. Anyway, we move our teams into indestructible cover. And we'll say our tank is in a ditch on the banks of the water that keep it out of sight of the enemy tank. Unfortunately, the enemy MG and standard team wasted no time laying down fire on our position. And before we can get a grasp on the situation, an enemy shock team charges into a flanking position. But instead of firing on our ground units, it prioritizes throwing an anti-tank grenade at our tank, damaging it. Our tank doesn't take kindly to this, so before the shock team can make its next move, our tank fires an explosive shell and wipes out the whole team. Now that we have our foothold, we order our engineer team to blow up the standard team's cover, making them easy pickings. We also order our assault team to press forward to the next bit of tough cover. To cover their flank, our tank takes advantage of an angle and blows up a standard team on the far right. We retreat our tank before the enemy tank can get a shot off at it. Meanwhile, we order our assault team to throw a grenade at the standard team that is now close to them. In preparation for our advancement, we order our scout team to use their super suppress ability on the MG emplacement, completely stopping it from firing. To draw the enemy tank's attention away from us, we tell our assault team to re-enter stealth and move for the pickup on the right. Although the stealth almost immediately breaks, it buys the assault team just enough time to make it to the new cover while also drawing in the tank. The assault team also manages to find a Panzerfaust, but it's not best used when facing the front of the tank. We, the player, use the distraction as well as the earlier suppression to charge in and take out the enemy MG team. We lose a health segment in the encounter, but we also find a civilian to save. But before we do that, we quickly rush the distracted and out of position tank. We plant a satchel charge, though it takes a few seconds longer than when the assault team did it. And moments later, the tank explodes. We send the scout team back to the house to rescue the civilian, which provides a small heal to the entire squad, including the normally unhealable tank. Speaking of that tank, we send it down to dispose one of the last standard teams on the bottom right edge of the map. Behind that enemy we just blew up, we discovered a patch of foliage that we can blast through with a satchel charge, giving us a massive flank against the center's most dangerous units. But before we plant the bomb, we line up our other ground units at a gap further down the tree line. We are currently in stealth, so it's time to plan an ambush. We use our ability to set up orders beforehand, telling our scout team to fire on the shock team in the center, and we tell our assault team to rush to new cover only when we give them the execute order. With these orders set up, we blast through the foliage, rush to nearby cover, and start distracting the enemy tank. At the same time, our own tank destroys the flanked artillery team. With the backline in chaos, the enemy units down the center turn to face us. In response, we execute our orders, which results in all three flanked enemies being wiped out in one fell swoop. Now, the enemy tank doesn't know how to respond, since we pincer it with... So, we pincer it with Panzerfaust shots from our assault and explosive shots from our tank. This helps the assault team save a shot. We also move our scout and engineer teams in. The scout team super suppresses the MG, while the engineer team uses an explosive shot to destroy the standard team's cover and kill them. At the bottom, we send our tank to wipe out a hidden standard team. Our scout team, meanwhile, distracts the MG as we send our assault in to take it out. But as they come back out, they are flanked by a shock team coming in from the left. Our scout then kills the out-of-cover shock team. Unfortunately, one of the assault units was killed in the scramble, which means they will not be available for the rest of the mission. That includes the team's rank 3 ability to charge. Our assault team finds another civilian to rescue, but it can only heal the injured, not revive the dead. There's also a grenade pickup there, but only the player can grab those, so we choose to leave it. Our player down below, meanwhile, managed to find a sniper, which we do take for ourselves. We have the engineer team, or the engineer and scout teams, take position and fire on a standard team on the left. The engineer's explosive shot helps clear the way for killing them. Down to the south, we managed to find another route that we can blow through with a satchel charge. But before we do, we ask our assault team for an ammo refill, since our American weapons are running low. We can also do this with our other teams, but each team only has one charge per mission. After we blast through the flank, it's as simple as cleaning up the last bits of resistance. We take position and wipe out a standard team with our sniper. We use our assault team's last remaining Panzerfaust shot to blow up the MG. And finally, we order our tank forward to wipe out the last standard team and the artillery. The mission has been officially cleared. We get a nice congratulatory cutscene, and our scout team even acknowledges that we saved the civilians, boosting our trust with them. Aside from losing the one ally units, everything went very smoothly. But remember, we didn't have to do it this way. And I don't just mean we were picking a route to, and I don't just mean when we were picking a route to take. Instead of defending, we had the option to take a few teams and initiate our own flank. If we had done that, we would have been given a different prelude mission before the counterattack. The counterattack would have also had a different start point and a smaller enemy count. Perhaps there was even a third option that could have been unlocked if we had enough trust with our squad. Again, this demonstration is not meant to be perfectly polished thing, but I hope that it does give you an idea of what I'm going for with my overall pitch. Now, speaking to Gearbox directly, while this is my pitch, I go into it understanding that video games, especially AAA ones, are a collaborative effort. If this overly long presentation accomplishes anything, it's that it kicks you all into fifth gear for the Brothers in Arms sequel. And I fully encourage you to take whatever you want from this presentation if you believe it improves the game. But if these ideas do resonate with you, I humbly offer my services in further refining these ideas. I'd also be more than happy to take on any role you believe is most appropriate for me, so long as I am given the chance to contribute to what I truly believe could be a smash hit video game. But I am not coming at you from nowhere. If this presentation proves anything, it's that I have a clear vision for what this game should look like. That is something not every game can claim to have, and it is a very useful thing to have, both from an economical standpoint as well as a consumer standpoint. Another thing that I hope shows in my presentation is that I do have more than just intuition. While I may not have any high-octane game dev experience, I'm also not a complete novice. I was even the vice president of my college game developers club before I switched my focus to other things down the line. But I also wouldn't knock natural intuition. That sort of thing can lead to surprising developments. And what screams commitment more than making an almost 150 slide long presentation for a hypothetical game sequel that many other people are convinced will never happen? If you bring me on board, I will be in it for the long haul. Which leads to my final reason. If you let me join in on the project, it would be a wonderful opportunity for me to learn and train in a real high-octane game dev environment. Not only will you have an employee growing within your company, said employee will probably be grateful enough to show a great deal of loyalty and appreciation. In a time when game dev jobs are becoming more and more nebulous, to have someone reliable and loyal on hand can be a very useful thing. But again, if this presentation accomplishes anything, is to hopefully start or expedite a Brothers in Arms sequel with or without me. A sequel that I can confidently say I am not the only one waiting for.
My dad said something to me after the divorce. He said every soldier has two families, those you raise and those you raise hell with.
I honestly feel like we could always get a fourth game for this because there is some stuff that is waiting for it.
Many people have given up hope for a sequel, but I still believe for these two reasons. Last year, Gearbox collaborated with Pinball FX, a pinball simulator game, to add a Brothers in Arms machine. While I appreciate the nod to the franchise, seeing this instead of a sequel hurt my soul a little.
I really do hope that there is a new Brothers in Arms game in development, because this series, it is one of my most favourite first-person shooter series. Even though they are quite old now, they are still extremely playable, extremely enjoyable.
I really do want at least one more Brothers in Arms game so we can finish up the story with these main characters.
The other reason I still have hope is because we've seen a slow resurgence of tactical shooters, with games like Escape from Tarkov, Insurgency and Ready or Not. But more importantly, the popularity of World War II tactical shooters like Hell Let Loose and Squad 44.
Looking forward, the future of the Brothers in Arms franchise remains nebulous. On one hand, World War II has slowly become in vogue again as a setting, with major franchises such as Call of Duty returning to the conflict to frame and guide their design.
There is no first-person shooter set in World War II out there that does World War II quite as well as Brothers in Arms. Nothing puts an emphasis on the men fighting beside you as this game. Nothing plays quite like it, and it's a really unique, I think, World War II first-person shooter.
Like, we really need to see the ending of Baker. At least see the Battle of the Bulge and see if he ends up dying there. I'm fine with the story ending after that. I just want to see what happens with these characters.
This series really was awesome. Great story, great characters, great gameplay, great soundtrack. It was just an all-around good experience to play through. It's also nice to learn about actual events that took place during these battles. This series is a perfect example of why first-person shooters can still work today, even in the World War II era, especially tactical first-person shooters.
The gameplay is still extremely solid, even though the first game released over 18 years ago, and they still play really well.
The gameplay formula was perfect. The realistic first-person elements combined with the strategy of commanding troops is awesome. Why this type of gameplay hasn't been recreated in other shooters is beyond me. You don't really see a lot of games like this.
And while online multiplayer remains an integral part of most first-person shooters, the current generation has segmented the genre with multiplayer-only shooters such as Overwatch, coexisting alongside single-player-only shooters such as Wolfenstein. Series such as Brothers in Arms have the possibility to thrive on the virtue of their single-player offerings alone. However, it's difficult to tell if Gearbox will ever give their due to the franchise.
It was the first time that I worked on a game that there was some real pathos, there was some real drama that was happening, and you get this great teaser at the end for a game that never happened.
This truly is one of the best game series out there across the board for not only World War II shooters, but shooters in general.
I mean, it was the first it was the first lead character that I had in a game, and it's something that I've always wanted to as a gamer and as an actor, I've always wanted to go back to it. I want to.
Yeah. And for all these reasons, that is why Brothers in Arms is the best first-person shooter World War II series ever made.
And at the end of the day, Brothers in Arms Hell's Highway demands a sequel, because
Their story is not over.
And they even put to be continued. Wow. In terms of story, just pure story, that was one of the best games I have ever played. In terms of the trilogy as a whole, again, the story is probably in the top 3 of games and series that I've ever played. I personally think they did an amazing job, but they set it up, of course they would, for another game, and my God, I want that so bad.
This is not your stop. There's more road ahead. Tell me, Matthew, you've made it through hell. How do you feel about snow?
I can handle snow.
All right. thank you so much for bearing with my overly long presentation. When the video goes up, I encourage you all to share this with fellow Brothers in Arms fans, and heck, let me know if you have anything you would like to add to my framework. Thank you all again, and have a good night.